Welcome to the Power and Light podcast. My name is Josiah Winnell, and this is episode 51 as we eclipse the 50 episode mark last time. It's good to be back. Unfortunately, a Chiefs loss hampered any hopes of a championship recording once again. Our streak ends, but we're back and we're ready to talk about soccer. Something that we don't talk about a lot on this show, but we want to really showcase a really exciting time in Sporting Kansas City, specifically in our Kansas City sports landscape. Joining me today is Milo Anderson. Milo, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good myself. What about you, Josiah?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. One of the biggest reasons I'm doing great is because we both had the privilege to attend Sporting Kansas City Media Day yesterday. Milo, can you just kind of walk us through what we got to do and tell our listeners what really stood out to you?
Yeah, it was really cool. We got to go watch a little bit of the practice. We got to hear from the sporting director, Mike Burns, and we also got to hear from Coach Peter Vermes, and then all the players are sitting out in the lobby. You can go talk to whoever you wanted to. I believe we spoke to Willie Agata, Jake Davis, Tim Leibold, and Eric Tommy, and they're all very optimistic about the season. One thing that stuck out to me was in the press conferences, we heard the word rebuild a lot from the head coach, from the sporting director, but then people were asking, well, how do you view this season? And all of the coaches start to say, well, what are we doing if we're not here to win? So despite it might be a rebuilding season for Sporting KC, they're still here to win. They're still here to compete, and they have a big one this Tuesday.
Yeah, they do, and we'll dive more into that in the future part of this episode. But I think looking at a bigger landscape of what the offseason looked like, obviously Sporting Kansas City brings in a lot of brand new players, and those guys you mentioned, those are veteran returning guys. But we talked to those guys about the new additions to this team. There's a lot. They said that right now that there's 8, and there possibly could be even more than that. Milo, can you kind of break down which people are you really excited about joining and what they can really bring to this Sporting KC team?
Yeah, a main player I'm really excited about is to see how Dejan Joveljic fits in this team. Coming off of a great season for LA Galaxy, he was backup striker for them for a few years behind Javier Hernandez, also known as Chicharito, for LA Galaxy, but he finally got to start last year, and he did tremendously well. He led his team to an MLS Cup. Not sure the exact amount of goals he scored, but he made a huge impact, especially on the attacking side. And that was something that Sporting showed that they need last year, even with the bigger names in Johnny Russell, Daniel Shalhoub, or Alan Pulido. They just couldn't find the back of the net as many times as we're used to them seeing. So the addition of Joveljic and kind of a swap with Joveljic and Pulido, I think it's gonna be very good for Sporting KC, and I think it's gonna help their attack a lot.
Manager Peter Vermes said this is the biggest roster turnover he has seen since he joined the club back in more than a decade ago. And he just talked about this roster turnover is he didn't want to call it a rebuild like you were saying, but he did say, in all honesty, that's what it is because you're restarting, you're resetting. You have the core pieces that you need, though. We talked about the guys that we got to speak with. Well, how important is it to have guys like Jake Davis or Eric Tommy that have been there for a couple of years and in the role now of really welcoming in these new guys and telling them, hey, this is a winning culture, but we've been struggling as of late. We want to go start to win. How important is it to have those guys on the team, and what did you see from those guys specifically yesterday?
Well, it's very important because they recognize that their team was heading in the wrong direction. Finishing 13th in the West last year is not what this club is used to doing after making the playoffs a lot, getting the 1 seed a lot. And guys like Jake Davis and Eric Tommy are really big leaders on the team. They're always hard workers and they lead by example. And you can see it out on the field when they're running up and down the pitch, making sure to get back on defense while still getting up to help the offense. And when you have a guy who works that hard, it influences the guys around you. And I think we're going to see a lot of that this year.
We had the privilege of sitting down and talking to head coach Peter Vermes manager, but really in that managerial position. And after one of his busiest off seasons ever in his entire career in that manager position, we got to talk to him for a while. And we'll play that clip in a second. But Milo, what was the biggest takeaway that you had from just speaking with Peter in both the press conference, but also our one-on-one interview?
Yeah, well, we mentioned how this team is very young, and Peter Vermes said when a player is young, he brings hunger. He brings hunger to the team because when you're young, you want to go in, you want to go prove yourself, you want to get that spot in the lineup. So having a young team, maybe they're not the most talented, maybe they don't bring the most skill set, but they're hungry to get in this lineup. They're going to be fighting as hard as they can for each position, and then once they're out on the field, they're going to be fighting for their team. And I think we're going to see a lot of hard workers this year with these young players.
Yeah, like Milo was saying, he was talking about that hunger, and we'll break down more of what he said. Let's go ahead and play that clip from that interview that we got to sit down with the manager for Sporting Kansas City, Peter Vermes.
Already today with a lot of the questions that were asked, but I just want to go back to how young this team is, right? It's a completely different switch from last year, and as young reporters, it's kind of exciting for us to see, people coming out through the system, but also going out and finding players. What do you think, just as a general aspect of how young this team is, how do you think that contributes to your culture as the club, how just anything in the locker room right now and on the pitch?
Yeah, first of all, I think youth brings hunger. It brings a desire to prove oneself, and those are all real good qualities. The group also, then, I would like to hope that is more durable when you're younger. Obviously, you can withstand a little bit more of what I would say in this game is the tough part, right? Is because you got unbelievable travel, you have congestion of schedule, you have different climates you got to play in. There's all these things, and you need people that are available to play. And so with the youth, the great thing is that we have the ability to hopefully some of them are going to become good enough that they become foundational pieces for this club for years to come. And I always have thought that it's very important to have a core group of players that you can rely on, but more importantly, that you can have the continuity from year to year over time, because they are what set the foundation of the team then moving forward. So the youth has a lot of really good benefits. At the same time, you also have to have patience with it as well.
Yeah, and I think that balance is something that's going to be a difficult road of what you're going to be figuring out this year. But I think you have such a solid veteran group, even though they're still technically young. It's such a solid group. I was talking to Tim, though, about something that you said specifically last year. You talked about, in a kind of a rough patch, right? You're talking about mentality and how it's so important to start with that, having to start with the mentality, whether it's in practice or it's an actual match. And he talked about how he feels like the mentality is different this year. Do you agree with that? And what does that look like specifically for you?
I would, and I would say it all stems from your everyday culture. I think this group understands that they individually all have, let's forget about soccer for a second, right? Let's just talk about their everyday interaction, training, traveling with each other, staff, all of that. There's an individual responsibility that you have, right? First off, number one, you have to have respect for your teammates, staff members, vice versa. You also have a responsibility to people's time. Like an example is if I don't know, you had to see one of the physical therapists or one of the massage therapists and you had to be there at 2:00 and now you show up at 2:15. Well, you're disrespectful of their time. You're also disrespectful of the next person that may have to see that massage therapist or that physical therapist. Those things are important. They add or they also subtract from then what you do on the field. If you're not responsible and not accountable off the field, very difficult for you to do that on the field. And so that mentality, it starts there, and then it all filters to each other and also then onto the field in your game and the way you play.
Yeah, I can already see it coming out because I was talking to some of the guys that said, I know as soon as the ball kicks off on Tuesday, Lionel Messi, Suarez, these guys are just opponents. None of that is in their minds. And I think that's already a little bit different. I'm not going to say that's what happened last year, but I feel like because of last year's experience, but also the fact that this mentality is different, that's really already stemming out into their mentality for this game. Do you agree with that? And what does that look like specifically for Tuesday?
Yeah, I do. And let me say it this way: if you go all the way back to our first day of preseason and you go to our last day of preseason, there is significant progress in all aspects of our game, but also in the people and the way that they understand about how we are and they are to approach practice, games. But now we're going to play a real game, and we're playing obviously an incredibly formidable opponent, right? But it's a great challenge for a young team, a team that is trying to find itself, is trying to find the things that they believe in and they can fight for. And so mentality-wise, I think the team we're not there yet, right? We're going to be different than we are right now, and a month from now we'll be different, but we're in the right direction. Last year, our culture wasn't good. Last year, I don't think our mentality was good. I think the difference now is that this group understands that the game is 90 minutes. It's not if you give up a goal, then all of a sudden you can't come back. I think they have a different aspect also about defending, and all of those things. They're not going to all happen on Tuesday night, but there has to be pieces of that do show up in the game and that we can build from. And if it does, there's going to be two things after that. It's going to be both from the staff and the players, there's going to be this level of patience, because not everything is going to happen all at once, and everybody has to continue to believe and work a little bit harder on the next day to just get a little bit better, and you're just constantly trying to put like another layer on the onion, and then all of a sudden it actually becomes an onion, right? Like you see it, and that's what we're trying to create.
Milo, one of the biggest things I take out of that interview is he was talking about mentality. Like we discussed that last year with Peter, and he just felt like there was an issue in mentality, starting from that root and then kind of stemming out into everything else. Why do you think the mentality this year is different? Because I think it's honest, like in all honesty, it is a rebuild, and I think the players even realize that, and yet they still have the fire to go win games against like Inter Miami on Tuesday, but they also realize that they have a chance at a few of these trophies that they can go on and win in this very long MLS season. So how do you feel the mentality is different from last year compared to this year?
Well, I think last year for them was just a really big learning experience. A lot of drop points late in games and at home, which really frustrated the fans. And it was all the mentality, like you just said there, Josiah. Peter Vermes mentioned the mentality of the team a lot last year, and he's just said it simply wasn't good. And so this year they've all hit a reset. They've sat down. They've realized what they got wrong, and they're trying to fix it. I think we're going to see a lot in these first 2-3 weeks to see if this team has really changed or if they're going to be stuck with a bad mentality. Yeah, it's going to be a big game Tuesday night because, like Peter Vermes says, it's a big challenge for them with this young team and an experienced team, and going up against guys like Messi and Suarez and Busquets. Like it's not going to be easy for them, so they're going to have to go in with a strong mentality.
Yeah, let's dive right into that. Let's preview this Tuesday matchup. You said strong mentality, but you also, I mean, the mentality part of it also has to factor in the weather. So Milo, give us a little bit of a forecast. What are we looking at for Tuesday, and how do you think that will affect the players based on what you heard from them yesterday?
Yeah, well, Tuesday is going to be one of the coldest days of the week. It's going to be in the -10, feels like, something like that, and the snow is going to be falling. So certainly it's going to play more of an advantage to Sporting KC because Miami's down in the heat, but it's still going to be miserable out there for both guys. We spoke to the players about how the weather is going to affect their game, and they didn't seem like it was going to be a factor, which we'll see what it really is like when the game comes. But yeah, they were pretty set on getting ready for the game the same way they normally would. They said the weather wouldn't be much of a factor, and they were really just looking forward to not only just getting to play the greatest of all time again, but getting to play in the Champions League against a good team like Inter Miami.
Yeah, they were cheesing when I asked them about facing, obviously a lot of guys, but specifically Lionel Messi. But we talked about it though with them, change from last year, right? So describe, I guess, first of all, you got to go attend that Lionel Messi Inter Miami game versus Sporting Kansas City last year. That was in front of 70,000 plus because it was at Arrowhead. This year is completely different. So explain your experience that you had in that first one, but then also describe, based on what you heard yesterday, how this one's going to be. It's going to feel, and it's also going to be different.
Yeah, well, that one out at Arrowhead Stadium against Inter Miami. It was probably the best atmosphere for a game I've ever been at, or for a soccer game at least. It was loud. There was chanting. There was the most away chanting I've ever heard at a game. A lot of Messi chants, a lot of cheering when he scored, a lot of cheering when Suarez scored. But yeah, this one will certainly be different. That one was played in April, and it was a beautiful 70-degree day. This one, not so much, early February, and it's going to be negative degrees, snow falling, and I think it's really going to impact the play of the game, just of how cold it's going to be out there. It's going to be bitterly cold. But yeah, it's going to be a lot different in front of 50,000 less fans if the stadium fills up with the temperatures, what it's looking like. Yeah, it's really going to be a different experience. And this not being an MLS game, it's a Champions League game, and it's a leg one, which we usually see in the first leg of a tie. We see a lot more caginess to the game because no one wants to go down in that first leg. You really want to be able to win the second leg. So for all of our sake, I hope we don't see that. I hope we see a good game, lots of goals. And yeah, I'm really excited to this one, and I know the players are really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be a great game. I'm excited to attend as well. I think that one of the biggest things, though, for Sporting is they realize, yes, there might be some caginess on both sides offensively, but defensively, they're preparing for the worst because some of the best, strikers in the world are on this Inter Miami team. But you and I, like I mentioned, got to witness practice, just a few minutes of it, but we got to see a defensive drill, and you kind of broke down what was going on right there. Can you describe what the Sporting KC defensive players were working on and how that's going to translate to a game against a striker like, or in the situation like all those strikers from Inter Miami?
Yeah, with all the firepower of Inter Miami, we even see their outside back Jordi Alba getting down the flank and looking for the crosses. And so yesterday we saw Sporting KC practicing trying to deal with those crosses. They were lining up in the box, and people were just firing in crosses at them. And the defense they were really living up to the challenge, at least in practice, clearing the ball out. But we all know in game it's completely different, and not just because of the cross that comes in, but the space that Lionel Messi seems to find is just incredible. For being the greatest of all time, and on the field, you think the defenders are always looking for him, but he always just seems to find a little pocket in the box. He seems to always get open, and with Jordi Alba, who's played with him for so long, he seems to always find him. So not only do you need to be strong in protecting those crosses, but you have to be constantly head on a swivel, looking for Lionel Messi to make sure he doesn't get across.
Yeah, I love what you said right there, and it might be too soon, it might be too raw to say this, but in general, over the past few years, that's how Travis Kelce is, right? He just somehow, one of the best receivers that you're going to face, somehow finds an option. He finds the hole. He creates space, even though that you should be looking for him the whole time. It's just some of the greats can do it, and so I love that comparison, that description that you had for those guys, because yeah, it really is a very, very solid team. And Sporting Kansas City, they're starting off their year. Yes, they had preseason, but they're starting off their campaign, their 2025 campaign, with a really, really tough one. So we'll see what they can do. And like you said, though, the weather might even it out. The advantage goes to Sporting Kansas City in that situation. Milo, any final thoughts that you have about that matchup, or just Sporting Kansas City as a whole this year, because it feels so much more different than last year?
It feels different, but at the same time, it's just such a big unknown with the MLS. You see a lot of teams step up in years that you maybe wouldn't think that they would. Also in the MLS, a lot of the teams are very even out in the players that they have, except for Miami with a few of the greatest. But a lot of teams are very even out, and it really just comes down to the performances that you put out on the field. Because a lot of these players in the MLS, they all have the experience. They're all young, and they're all pretty much on a level playing field. It just really comes down to the performance game by game. And last year we didn't see the best performances from Sporting KC. They would always seem to let in the first goal, and then it was really tough for them just to come back. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to see how this season goes and see how the mentality of the Sporting team is.
Yeah, and yeah, you just summed up basically everything that we learned yesterday perfectly. And I think, like you said, you're referencing last year. This team really struggled to close games last year, And talking to head coach Peter Vermes, we heard that in the interview earlier. But it's just one of those biggest struggles that really, really dropped so many points for this Sporting KC team. And now it's kind of nice because they had more time in the offseason because they didn't get to make it to the playoffs. But this is kind of a mentality switch that hopefully will stem to a few more points here and there. And yes, you can take a draw as long as you don't blow it in the last few seconds with a goal. Yes, you should go and win. You should get 3 points as long as you don't blow it there at the end. So there was a lot of close games last year. And then I guess, Milo, that's what I'll finish off with. We've already talked about why this team is different, but why do you think this team can possibly close games better than they did last year?
Well, like I said earlier, just the learning experience from last year. I know none of the guys out there will want to repeat the way that some of those games ended. So maybe it's just going to be like an extra effort in those final 10 minutes, just giving everything you have, because in the last year, it didn't look like they were giving everything they had. It looked like they were just content with, letting the other team attack them and just hopeful that they wouldn't score. But this year, I think we're going to see them more locked down on the defensive line. And I think just the learning experience from the poor year that they had last year, I think they're just going to learn from those mistakes and apply it to this year, and in those final moments, close out the games better.
Well, Milo Anderson, thank you so much for joining us on the Power and Light podcast today. A great analysis. I can't wait to see what you were talking about specifically with the connection that these Inter Miami players have on Tuesday. Again, Sporting Kansas City taking on Inter Miami in the first matchup in their opening tournament against Inter Miami. It's going to take place at Children's Mercy Park, with Sporting Kansas City hosting the first of 2 legs between these two teams. It's going to be a great matchup. Milo and I will be there. We're very excited to be there and experience, very warmly experience that game. We'll bundle up for that one. If you're attending, you should also bundle up with frigid temperatures on the way. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll finish it off with our favorite tradition, the quote of the day. And I think with Lionel Messi, coming up, I feel like that's the best way to end this. So a Lionel Messi quote for you to finish off your day listening to our episode. Thank you once again for listening. Here it is. You have to fight to reach your dream. You have to sacrifice and work hard for it. Lionel Messi sends us into the end of episode 51. Thank you so much for listening.